and adding text to your Photoshop projects. So I've gone ahead and created a new document, just 2000 by 2000 pixels with a white background. To get to your text editor or text tool, just go to this T or press the T on your keyboard for that shortcut. Up above, you'll see your basic options for text, including your font style, your points or the font size. You got your basic paragraph settings and color, and a couple other ones we'll look at in just a minute. You might not have these fonts that I'm using, so feel free to follow along with any font that you have. Open Sans is one of my favorite fonts. You can download it online for free. It's a nice clean font. So I'm going to go ahead and use that and use bold. So what happens when you use the text tool? If you click, Photoshop is going to add some temporary text, which is white on our white background, which we can't see. So I'm going to change my font color or my text color to black, which is that button right there. Lorem ipsum is just a sort of temporary text that you'll see all over the place, as sort of a temporary, like I said, temporary text to add. So what you'll want to do is select that, which I did by pressing Command A, Control A on a PC, and then typing in, here is some text. So you'll notice that this text is now centered to where I clicked, and that's because the paragraph settings up here are set to center. You have more options, which we saw earlier in the class, character and paragraph panels. So in your character panel, you have all of your different options. Now, what happens when I try to change this? Nothing. And that's because this text is not selected. So if we select part of this text, some of this text, and then we adjust it, it's just going to adjust what is highlighted. So if you're trying to adjust all of your text, you're going to want to select all of it. We can type in a new font size. We can now adjust it. You can adjust the size. You can adjust the line spacing. So let's go ahead and add another line. Here is another line. Now to move your text, the best thing to do is either hold the Command button down just to be able to briefly move it around, or you can go back to your Move tool and move it around. If you're in the text tool though and you press the Command button, that's nice because it's kind of like that spacebar button for switching over to the hand move tool. It's just temporary and you'll get back to your text tool as soon as you let go of Command. Again, Control on a PC. So now we can have this text and we can adjust it. So if we select all of it, we can adjust the line spacing, the leading, the kerning, which is the space between the letters. All of that is here. So if we want to add some space in between our letters, we can make our text increase the scale of our font. So this is kind of creating a custom font with the width or the height. Set that back to 100. You can change the baseline shift, meaning where the bottom of the text lies with this option here. And then you have your sort of faux styles here. So you have bold, italics. I'm already on all caps. That's why you see that my text is in all caps right here. You have small caps, which will make it all caps, but the actual letters that you capitalize on your keyboard using the Shift button will be a larger capitalization compared to the rest. You have a superscript, subscript, underlining, strike through, all of these kinds of things. Now, you'll notice though that I have a faux bold, and then in our font settings, we have multiple versions of this font. So I actually have an extra bold, a light style here, which will give you more options for this text than this just simple bolding right here. This is kind of a quick, easy way to add bolding to your text, but I would definitely recommend using the font style over here if you want to make your font bold or italics, if you have that option, because some fonts don't have multiple versions like this one does. Now you'll also notice something that is happening if I'm in my move tool. If I have the move tool and I just select this entire text layer, then if I make adjustments to any of these properties, it will actually make a change to the text layer. And even if I go back to my text tool and I just have my entire layer selected, it will still make changes to our text entire layer. But if we click onto our text and we're just clicked somewhere and we're trying to make a change, it doesn't affect it. So if you're kind of like editing your text and you're like, oh, I'm trying to adjust these settings, but it's not working, just understand that if you are in your text tool and you're actually clicked into your text layer, these won't affect it unless you click out and you click the layer over here or go to your move tool and then make your adjustments. We also have our paragraph settings. So under this paragraph tab, you have more options than if you're just in the text layer up here. So you can left align, center, right align. You can indent. With all these, you can indent just the first line of a paragraph. Now, this brings up another kind of thing that is good to know. How do you create a block of text? So let me just delete this layer. To create a block of text, what you want to do is with your text tool, click and drag and create a box. So now this is going to create a box of text, and you can see it inserts this temporary text, and now you have all of these options for different paragraph styles. We can make this smaller. It'll continue to fill in with more text. So here, let's make this a little bit more easy to see. So now you can see that there's a lot more options here. You can indent the first line here with this option. If you have multiple paragraphs, you can indent the first paragraph or the last paragraph down here with these settings. You can hyphenate words with this hyphenate button. So a lot of options for editing your paragraphs here. To adjust the size of the box after the fact, you have to be in the text tool. So say I'm in my move tool and I'm like, oh, I want to make this bigger. Nope, that's not going to happen. It's going to actually make the entire text bigger, but not the text box. So go into your text tool, click in your text box, and now you have the bounding box edges, the handles that you can adjust. So that's a good introduction to the text tool. In the next lessons, we'll be diving deeper into some specific types of text you might want to create and different options you have, like curving your text and aligning text to different shapes and things like that. Awesome. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next lesson. Welcome to this new lesson on how to warp text. So a quick tip though that I haven't mentioned before is if you're in your zoom tool and you want to zoom in to a specific sort of size, you can click and drag to the left or right. And so you can really kind of get specific with how zoomed in you are rather than kind of like clicking and then using your hand tool to move around. Just simply clicking and dragging to the left or right might help you. All right, so warping text. So with our text layer selected and our text tool, you'll notice this warp button over here. This brings up a little dialog box with some options for the style you want to choose. There's lots of them. Arc, bulge, fisheye, all kinds of styles that you can play with. But basically the way it works is you have your basic style and then you can adjust how strong it is. So pretty basic. You can warp the horizontal and vertical distortion and get pretty creative with this kind of stuff. But I just wanted to show you this is a quick and easy way to create sort of a predetermined style. In the next lesson, we are going to see how to align text to a specific line. For example, if you want it to go around a circle or things like that. This is great for creating those kind of badge style graphics, which we'll be actually diving into a project later on in this course. So I just wanted to show you that's the warp tool. The last thing I want to mention while I am going through some of these other options up at the top is this drop down, which we skipped. These are your anti-aliasing options. Sometimes, depending on your font, the edges of your text and letters can look a little bit distorted. So these give you sort of options to make it sharper or crisper. Sharpening and crisp options are going to look better for fonts that are smaller, whereas smooth and strong are going to look better if your text is really large. And again, it depends on the font that you're using. Sometimes fonts that have serifs, which are those little edges to your letters. Let's just show you a serif font really quick. Rockwell, see how this has like those little details at the edge, or like Times is a classic one that has serifs. These things might look a little weird in your graphics, and if that ever is the case, you're saving your photos and you're looking at it closely or zoomed in and you're like, oh, it looks a little distorted, go back to this anti-aliasing effect or option and see if that makes any difference. So that's how you warp text and a couple other tricks. I hope you enjoyed this lesson, and we'll see you in this new lesson where you're going to learn how to make your text follow a line that you've created customly or any shape. So let me actually delete all of this, and we're going to start from scratch. So first we have to create our line or our shape. So we learned how to do that with the pen tool before. So you can use any of the pen tool, the freeform pen tool, or the curvature pen tool. Let's have our line, or create a line, something like this, which is what we originally created. And then take our text tool. Hover over this text with this layer selected, or this line rather, and when you see that the text tool changes to the little text tool with the wavy line, click, and you'll see that it adds text to the line. Now this text is super big, so we're going to decrease the size to something that is a little bit easier to work with, or really to whatever you want. And now we can add our text. Now you might be wondering though, how do I change it so that the text starts not in the center of this line, but at the beginning? We have a tool for that. It's called the path selection tool. So if you click here, it looks like a regular mouse. And then if we click on our path, you'll see that it has this little X mark that now we can adjust and move forward or backward around our path. We can also, if you click and drag underneath our path, it actually makes the text go on the bottom side of the path. So now, and you can literally just click on the path where you want instead of dragging as well. So now we can go back to our text tool and adjust the size of our text so that it follows our path or our shape. Now our shape layer is still there, so we want to actually delete that shape layer. So if we save it, it's not there. Now it was white, so it kind of just blended into our background. But let me show you. So with our ellipse tool now, let's change the fill to black, just to show you what happens. So say we create a circle. We're going to then take our text tool, and again, with this ellipse tool selected in the layer panel, you'll see that there are two options. One is if we click on the line, we have that sort of wavy text option. And if we click there, it's going to create text that goes around our circle. Let me undo that, delete that. Now, if I take my text tool, and you'll see that if I hover inside of this text or inside of the circle, it looks different. And if I click, let me turn off our ellipse, you'll see that now we have this text that's inside the circle. So you can actually kind of create custom sized paragraph shapes to fit a paragraph of text in a custom shape. And then you can play with your paragraph settings or whatever to get it centered to however you want it. So that might be something you do. You can get pretty creative with creating a custom shape and then making this text really small. and filling in this shape with more text, that kind of thing, right? Now you'll see though that I turned off our ellipse, and that's because it was black. But just to show you how you make it go around really quickly, it's the same thing as we saw before. Take our text, hover over the edge of our shape. Let's turn off our ellipse. And now we have this text and smaller because that's what we had chosen before. But we can put this text around our circle. You can take your path selection tool and make sure you're hovering over the line itself and then clicking and dragging to rotate it. And again, you can put it on the inside or outside of the line, depending on where you are clicking and hovering your mouse. It's again one of those things that will feel natural and you'll get the hang of it once you start practicing. But you can do this with pretty much any shape or line or path that you create. Just clicking the text tool, selecting your layer, and then hovering over it and adding text to that line. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in another lesson. Welcome to this new lesson, which is actually a project. What I want you to do is create a poster or a graphic using just text and the different styles of text. So you can see this one that I created for a fake rock concert, trying to get creative and using layering, different font choices. And so go ahead, get creative with it, and I would love to see what you do. Now, a quick note, just because in the next lesson I will be just walking through this project as I always do, but you might not have all of the fonts that I'm using. Font available to us. There we go. Luxus Brute. And you can actually filter by Adobe fonts by clicking this Adobe button right here. So here's all the ones that I've downloaded from Adobe. So lots of different ways to get fonts, but have fun with it. And I can't wait to see your own project. You don't have to make it a rock concert flyer. You can do anything you want. And as always, share it with me on social media at Phil Ebner or at Video School Online. Thanks so much. Rock concert posters, so I'm going to be recreating this. So I've created a new project, just a square image with right now a white background. I'm going to add a new solid color black background to this. So I'm just going to lock that layer in place. Next, I'm going to add some text. I have my font as Bungee, so you might not have this font, but you can, if you're following along and want to do the same kind of poster, you can find that online or just use a different sort of bold font. Now, I'm going to make this bigger. You'll notice, though, a couple things that I want to mention. So let me first put this on two different lines, like so. Now, there's a couple different ways to increase the size of font, and I'll show you the difference. So if I just take my Move tool, you can actually resize text this way. So I'm taking my Move tool, selecting the outer handle, and I'm increasing the size. And that's going to take your font and it will actually increase the font size. So you can see here 219, and if I make this bigger, it becomes 251. When I'm doing this though, it's doing everything proportionately. Say I go in here and I select my font with my text tool, and then I increase the size this way, you'll start to notice that the font, the text starts to become layered on top of each other. And that's because my leading, or the space between lines, is set to 185. And when adjusting the font size this way, just with this font points, it's not adjusting the leading as well. And so what you might want to do is set your, if you're doing more of a graphic design project like this, is set the leading to what you want it to be. I like how it's touching just a little bit like so. And then using your Move tool, you can resize it to be the size that you want. So I like having it kind of over the edges just a little bit, something like that. We'll start from there. We can always change this later. I'm also going to change the color of this to that sort of blue or some sort of blue that we can start out with. Cool. All right. You'll notice that in my original project, I sort of created this 3D style that makes the text look sort of 3D. I simply did that by duplicating this layer and then moving the bottom layer actually. So let's take this bottom layer. Let's change the color and make it a little bit darker so we can see it. And then I just moved it down and to the right, just a little bit. And I'm going to make this even darker. Something like so. So I think that's a pretty cool, quick trick to make your text look a little bit 3D. You can also go in here and add a drop shadow effect and adjust those settings. So let me turn off this rock text, and if we double click our top rock text layer, you can get your layer styles. We've seen this before, and this is a good point to show you drop shadow. Now, because we're on a dark background, we're going to want to change our color to something else. So when we click that color picker, we have our eyedropper, as we typically do when this color picker window pops up. So I can click our color of our text right here to start from there and then drop this down to something like that. You're going to want to change the blend mode to something like normal. And then you play with the distance and spread and also the opacity. So I'm going to increase the opacity up here. And depending on if you want it to be blurred, you can adjust the size and spread settings. And then also the angle to put this, let's make this a little bit further, bigger. So I'm doing something very similar to what I did with the multiple layers, using just this layer style. And this is a cool option because it keeps your layer panel rather clean. So see, now this is an effect that is applied to this layer rather than having a separate layer itself. Two ways to get a similar effect, right? So either way you want to do that. With this one, I am going to leave that drop shadow effect on and do it that way. Next, we have this concert text that's kind of floating up. So remember how we were able to create a text on a path? We're going to use our curvature pen tool and create a line like so. See how it goes up? Take our text tool, hover over that line. Whoops. Let's go back to let's turn off the rock text really quickly. Take our text tool, hover over that line. It was kind of hard to see. Now we'll say concert. We'll change this font to, it was bakery. Let's get out of that Creative Cloud and then type in bakery. This is another font you might not have. Change the color to white and then make it a lot bigger. And then let's change the path where it starts. So using our path selection tool, let's move it a little bit forward on this path, something like that. And now if we turn back our rock text and put this concert text on top, we can use the move tool to move it around, resize it. And again, using the move tool to resize the text now also will increase the path size itself. So once you're happy with how the text is laid out on the path, it might be a better idea to adjust the size of your text with the move tool rather than going in here and adjusting the font, because that's going to adjust the text based off of where it is on the path, and it might change actually the shaping of the text. Hopefully that makes a little sense. So I'm going to delete that shape down below that we created because we don't need it. Next, I just added these details for where it's at, when it is, and this is using a font called Gil Sans. So let's just add another text layer. Now you'll notice that when I click to add a new text layer, it selected this rock text. So what I might want to do is lock this in place so I can go ahead and click somewhere else. And it's being tricky with me. It's thinking I want to select that text. I don't want to. So what I want to do is let me just turn that off really quick. Type in there in the blank space. Let's change the font to Gil Sans. We're going to make it white. I added these little slashes just as sort of a graphic design flourish. Town Square. Let's just make this caps. Let's add a little bit of space between these letters. So this kerning. Now let's put this over our rock concert text. Put it within the R, like so. I think light is a little bit too thin. So let's make it regular. That looks pretty good. And to just copy this, just holding Option, I'm going to click and drag this down here. And I forget when, I think it was January 1999. 1999. And I think that looks pretty cool. Now I'm just going to take our font. Oops, you'll notice that if you click the tab button, it kind of gives you a cleaner view of your project. So I accidentally clicked that, but that's just something to note, is if you want to kind of view your project without all the toolbars and panels, click that tab button. Now I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger. Something like that. It's a little bit different than my original one, but I think that's pretty close, pretty neat. Let's move this down. Let's then move our other font layers down just a little bit. Something like that. It's kind of cool. So that's how I created my rock concert graphic design poster. You learned a couple new tricks here, that tab button. You also learned about adjusting font sizes and things like that. So hopefully this was very beneficial to you, and I can't wait to see your graphics. Share them with me. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next lesson. I'll show you the steps to do it and some of the options. So we have this new text here. We'll put it on the bottom so we can see it a little bit better. And then double click that text layer. And this very first style is bevel and emboss. Now under bevel and emboss, you have different styles. So this emboss will kind of add a shadow behind it. If we go just to inner bevel, it kind of it's just using shading, but it makes the text look like a little round and bulging. You also have outer bevel, pillow emboss, stroke emboss. These are just different options. So this pillow emboss is kind of cool. Look, this almost looks like it's being stitched onto a pillow or a piece of fabric. And then you have the settings for this. So depth is going to make this sort of deeper or a bigger, more pronounced bevel or embossed. And then same with the size and the softening. This is going to allow you to change how that looks. Shading, depending on what option you have. If you have emboss on, it's going to allow you to change the direction, the opacity, and all of your different settings for the shading or the different texture that it's adding. So let me actually make this a little bit more practical. I'm going to find a texture that we can create sort of a look and a design that looks like something's sewed onto a pillow. I've gone ahead and added this fabric texture to your folder, which you'll see already in the photos under project 6. I'm going to drag this into our project like so, and just make it bigger, fill this entire frame. So now let's just zoom out just a little bit. Let's put this underneath our text. We're going to delete the bevel and emboss text and just have this new text. And we're going to put this here. We'll call this fabric. Let's make it a little bit bigger. And let's also change the color, the original color. We might change this later on just to make it look a little bit better, but let's make it white. Now let's double click this, choose bevel and emboss. For style, we're going to choose pillow emboss. Now that looks already pretty good, but I think the color of this text is what's actually not looking too good right now. We're going to go ahead and change the blend mode. Now I know I haven't shown you this yet. We're going to look at this in a different section and go through these in more depth, but you can see as I scroll through these different blend modes, it starts to blend with the background. So a couple of these do a very similar thing. You've got this darken or multiply. Now, if we do this multiply, that starts to look like this is actually etched in, but I also want to change the color. So let me change the color, make it something like this red, something like this. And now if we go through our blend modes, it looks a little bit different than if we had the text as white. Now, like an overlay or something like that looks pretty good. And then we could go into our bevel and emboss and change the size and settings until it looks like we want it to. Kind of like that chisel hard look. So now it almost looks like if you look at it quickly, it looks like some sort of patch or letters that are actually sewed into this fabric. And that's just using a layer style called bevel and emboss. So hopefully this gives you a good idea for how you can practically add and use these layer styles for your projects moving forward. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in another lesson. Just want to go through and run through some of the other layer styles just so you know what they do really quickly. So I just have this text right here, and if I double click this layer style, we have some that we haven't seen before. So we saw bevel and emboss, we saw stroke, inner shadow. This is something that's kind of interesting. So if we do inner shadow, and we increase the distance so you can see it a little bit more. And this is going to depend on the size of your text and the font point itself. So you might need to increase this or decrease this. But you can see that it kind of creates this sort of cutout look. It kind of looks like there is a red paper behind a white sheet, and there's letters that are actually cut out, and it's creating this inner shadow, which I think is pretty cool. Inner glow does what outer glow does, but to the inside of a layer. So again, we're going to have to increase the size of this to see what it does, but let's also change the color. Let's just make it super gaudy. I don't like that at all, but if you do that green, you can really see what this is doing. So it's adding to the inside of a layer. You can always reset these to the default by clicking reset to default. Or if for some reason you're always changing something such as the stroke color or size or the drop shadow size or direction, you can make a new default by clicking make default down there. Let's satin. It just gives this sort of satin style look to your text. So that sort of fabricy, nice, flowy, glowy kind of style. Color overlay. This is one that I often use, especially if I am kind of creating that sort of silhouette look. So we did this very early on in the course when we created the shadows for the elephant and the kid in that first project. But You can also do it to text, to pretty much any layer. Now, there's no reason to do this for text really, because you can just change the color of text in the color settings or the character panel. But for other shapes or graphics or pictures, that's where you would do that. Gradient overlay does a very similar thing. And this is one that you might want to use for text to make it easy to add that gradient. Pattern. This is pretty cool to add a pattern to your text. It kind of creates this cutout look, which is, I think, is pretty cool. And then we saw outer glow, and we've seen the drop shadow in the past. Let's reset to default for that drop shadow. Drop shadow is another one of those styles that I would be careful with. It's a style that I think a lot of amateurs add a drop shadow to make it look what they think better, but sometimes it can look a little amateurish. But I think this sort of shadow, just something subtle like this, can look pretty cool. It makes this text pop out from the background. Layer styles. So those are just some of the other layer styles you have available to you. Just play around with them. Go in, play with the effects. Again, this isn't a course where I'm going to go through each individual option and tell you exactly what it does.